involved with motorcycles?
Well, I was a kid on a farm, and when I was a kid I wanted a motorcycle in the worst way because I saw some of the neighbors have a dirt bike, and my dad wasn't much on getting me a motorcycle, so I had to build my own little motorcycle. And I used the tire off of a rake for a rear wheel, and the front tire was off of a bicycle, and I built my own little dirt bike. So that's kind of where I started. But time went by, and I graduated high school and decided to be a machinist. I went to school at the technical college and become a machinist. And in 1973, I was working at a racing shop in Twin Cities, and got a phone call from my dad because he knew I didn't care for living in the city, being a farm boy, and he said, you know, there's a cycle shop looking to hire a machinist right 3 miles from home. And I thought, boy, that looks like an opportunity to me to get out of the city. And so that machine shop wound up being George Sr., S&S Cycle. George Sr. was family to me and made me feel like family of S&S. But unfortunately in 1980, George passed. And George Jr., or George as we know him now, was thrown into the limelight and leader of the pack, so to speak, at S&S. And in 1983, George got a phone call from Denis Manning, and Denis said, George, we have a plan to build some motorcycles. Do you want to be involved? And of course, George was always wanted to be involved in something that was interesting and exciting and a challenge, because George was always up for a challenge. And so my part of that was just to be a machinist at that time. In 1984, we come to the Salt. I was fortunate enough to be asked to come to the Salt because I had been testing carburetors at the time. It was my job to test carburetors that was for customers. So I rode motorcycle a lot at S&S Cycle, much to my liking. When I was asked to ride Tramp, I managed to set 2 open records with Tramp. One was a 172 on gasoline, and the next record was 192. We went 192 open with the Tramp, and it was going at such good speeds and handling well, we decided that we should put a fairing on Tramp. So George was itching to put some nitro in this motorcycle, and Denis. And so we started out with somewhere around 80% loads, and motorcycle handled as well as it did, started going fast, and we were going over 200 miles an hour before we knew it. And I can remember it was in 1990, I have this ring that says 214.505 on it. That's the fastest speed we went at that time, and got me in the 200 mile an hour club. Time went on, I rode Tramp. The streamliner was being piloted, and we had trouble with handling. And one frustrating afternoon, Denis and George come to me and said, Dan, would you like to try to pilot the streamliner? And I'm not sure if I didn't know any better, or I was just excited enough I would try anything. So I got into streamliner, and though the streamliner was difficult to handle, I managed to pilot it and keep it on 2 wheels. Come back in 1990 a second time with Tramp, and the conditions were pretty good, and we put 90+ percent nitro in that motor, and we were at the line, and getting this motorcycle started is kind of a feat in itself. Nitro methane doesn't light off that well, but the motorcycle started, and they sent me off. And I'm in the middle of this run. I'm not getting a hold of the ground well. The traction isn't good, and but I'm accelerating. And as I get down the course, about the 2 mile, the course gets to be in good shape, and I'm getting a hold of the ground. And so I'm accelerating very hard. And I find myself with the steering, it seemed to be not moving, and it seemed stiff, and I realized at the time that I was clear to the locks, drifting sideways, and I had to get out of the throttle, and it was just about a mile before the traps. And I got out of the throttle, the rear end come back in behind me, and accelerated hard again, and we accelerated as fast as we could, and we were still accelerating out the back of the traps. But we got back down and stopped, and the van come, and they were all hollering and happy and blowing the horn. We went 239 and change. And so that was one of the highlights in my racing in the tramp motorcycle. The one time we had people along the course about every 3 miles reporting back the wind, because you can't run a streamliner with anything more than a 5-mile-an-hour crosswind. Reports come back that the wind was less than 5 miles an hour to send Dan with the streamliner. So off we went, and I understand just as I pulled the tow rope, my release rope, to go on my own, the radio come back and said, "Don't send Dan, the wind's starting to gust." Well, I didn't hear that, so off I went, and the run was going real well. But as I entered the 4 mile, I noticed I was leaning pretty hard to keep the motorcycle on the course. And you can lean that motorcycle and keep going, and I wasn't one to get out of the throttle with a couple of little bobs and a little lean once in a while. I like to stay in because these runs takes a long time. I noticed I was leaning a little more, and all of a sudden the black box that measures my speed was coming right at me fast, and so I had to lean it a little more, and the motorcycle went down, and the streamliner slid sideways and started to barrel roll. So I thought, it's time to pop the chutes. So I popped the chutes, both of them at the same time, and that shuts off the fuel in an emergency situation. And when I popped both chutes, you can imagine rolling sideways and popping your parachutes out instantly took me around, spun me around, and went the other direction. And stayed on the ground. It didn't tumble, but it just rolled and hammered a lot. And I come sliding to a stop, and everything was fine. I was breathing well, I was excited, and crawled out of the streamliner on its side, and here come Denis and George, and "Are you okay? Are you okay?" But I was fine, other than had my helmet full of salt from the scoop that went over my head. Was a roll bar, and that roll bar become a shovel when I went upside down, and it shoveled salt everywhere up into my helmet and my eyes, and so I was a sputtering mess for a while. But that was a good crash, or what I would call a good crash. The speed I was going at that time was 265 miles an hour, and they measured it upside down while I was crashing. So that was an interesting memory for me to put in my banks. And so the flip side of that was take the streamliner home, fix it. We're going fast. We have the capability of going really fast with the streamliner. We're all excited. So we went home. I think it was a 2-week window. We turned it around and get the streamliner back on the salt. So Denis went home. The streamliner went with Denis, and we went back home and worked on engines. We met back out here in 2 or 3 weeks. I don't remember the time. And there we were. The conditions looked great. We were very happy with the way the streamliner looked. It looked like brand new again. Denis done a great job. And at the starting line, we're ready to go. And so off we go. They towed me off, and down the course I was headed. And as I gained speed, I could smell something, and kept going, and I got well into the 260s, 270s. I don't know the speed, and I realized I couldn't breathe. Well, actually I could breathe, but I wasn't getting air. And what had happened is we didn't get the bulkhead between the engine and the rider's compartment sealed. And what I was breathing was all nitromethane fumes. I finally thought to release my seat belt, which allowed my hands to go up and open the door. And I put the skids down to hold the streamliner up, and I veered off the course. Somehow managed to keep the thing on 2 wheels and didn't crash it. That's kind of the serious side of racing at Bonneville. You understand that things can happen, but it is so much fun. We've had so much fun through the years and excitement that you tend to forget those little things and go back to racing. So after I got to feeling better, we were back racing Tramp, and then again the streamliner. And I think it was that trip that we went 289 miles an hour with the streamliner and set a two-way record of 278 and change.
I love the fact that I walked through the pits. It looks like you're working on a half a dozen bikes at any given time.
Yeah. Well, part of this trip was just that. Part of this trip was to help the racers that we provide parts to in some sponsorship form. And being out here and helping those people. Again, the Bonneville group, any one person, whether he's your competitor or a stranger, that person will help you as we would help them. And again, that's the family of Bonneville. The people like Warner Riley, George Smith, those people are legends as far as I'm concerned, because they both decided this is what they want to do. And well, we all know that Warner set records, went really fast in his day, and those times where the parts were fairly crude, but they made those parts work well. People like Denis Manning, who's gone from riding a motorcycle when he was young at the Bonneville Salt Flats with a dream of going really fast, and Denis has made that a lifetime achievement, and going from riding a motorcycle to building the world's fastest streamliner several times to having his own bub event. It's an honor for me to be at the bub event, because Denis and I spent a lot of time together in the years gone by, going to the Great American Motorcycle Show circuit. In one year I spent a lot of time with Denis. Denis is like a George, very driven. And when he set his mind to putting a motorcycle together that would be the world's fastest motorcycle, you saw what happened. Denis put that together.
Entering mile now.
So I would like to thank Denis for putting on an event and carrying it on for the years this happened. And I hope that this motorcycle group that we've had here today can go home and say, we had a ball, and it would snowball and include more people, and more people can come here and experience what we had. And so thank you, Denis, for putting on a great event. I hope we can have some more in years to come.
Let's fever right here at